Hi, this is Deanne. Today we're going to be discussing cell structure and function. So cells are the basic unit of structure and function in all living things. In order for something to be considered living, it must be made out of cells. And those tiny cells are what makes that living thing be able to function and be alive. This is going to be a typical cell that we will be discussing, and all of these different structures inside of it we will be reviewing and saying what their function is and also their structure. With cells, you can break them down into two different types. We have prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells have no nucleus and no organelles. They're very simple cells. The only example really we have of a living thing in this group is bacteria. In contrast, eukaryotic cells are more complex organisms. Anything that is not bacteria will fit into this group. They do have a nucleus, and they do have many organelles inside of them that make them function. Other cells that are both eukaryotic but are very different are plant and animal cells. Then we're going to go over 4 differences between these types of cells. The first difference is that plants have a structure around the outside of them called a cell wall. The animals do not. Plants also tend to have a more square or rectangle shape where animals do not. Animal cells aren't always round. They can be many shapes, but plants are generally always square or rectangle. Plants have a structure inside them called a chloroplast. A chloroplast is where photosynthesis takes place in the cell, and it also stores the green pigment chlorophyll. Animals do not have this. Plants have one very large vacuole inside of them, which will hold water and store other materials as well. Animals have vacuoles, but they have many little ones. Just showing a picture, the plant cell versus the animal cell. You can notice this has a more of a square shape because of the cell wall and also the large vacuole that it has, as well as the chloroplasts that the animal cell over here does not have. So now we're going to get into the different pieces inside the cell and what they look like and how they make the cell function. So we'll start with the cell membrane. What the cell membrane does is it regulates what goes in and out of the cell. So it's really like the doors to the cell. It lets some materials in and out, and it keeps some materials out. The structure of the cell membrane, it's made of a structure called phospholipids, and it has these other structures called proteins that are stuck inside of it. And the proteins, as well as the phospholipids, well, again, will act like a door, letting materials into the cell and out of the cell. This is just showing what the cell membrane would look like very close up. These would be the phospholipid. They're in 2 layers, and these white materials going through would be the proteins stuck in the middle of the cell membrane. The cell wall is another structure that we'll find in plant cells. There also are some bacteria cells that will have a cell wall too. For our purposes, we're kind of addressing this as far as plant cells go. It's going to add protection and support. So it's kind of like saying, if we're referring to the cell as being like a house, it's kind of like putting a security wall around your house. It's going to offer a lot of protection. Really what it does, it's very similar to the cell membrane. It lets water, carbon dioxide, oxygen get into the cell and out of the cell, because a plant will need all of those materials in order to survive. Showing the cell wall, it's this green structure going around the outside of the plant cell. Okay, moving on. The nucleus inside the cell is the control center of the cell. That's going to be where all the instruction is given to keep the cell functioning. The nucleus will have 3 parts to it. The first part is called the nuclear envelope. It's really just the outside of the nucleus, so materials can get into the nucleus and out of the nucleus. The second part is called the nucleolus. The nucleolus is a structure inside the nucleus where another organelle called ribosomes will be made inside of the nucleolus. And the last part, which is probably the most important part, are the chromosomes, which is the DNA. So this is the genetic material that makes us all unique. This is really the blueprint of the cell because this is where all of the instruction comes from in order to keep the living thing functioning. The next structure we'll talk about is called cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is a fluid that's found between the nucleus and the cell membrane. So it's kind of the stuff that everything inside the cell sits in. It's sort of like the air inside of a room where it's there, you might not think it's doing much, but it does have a function, and that's sort of how it behaves in the cell as well. This is showing the cytoplasm in this grayish area. It looks like the background of the cell, but it's like a gel-like fluid that's found inside the cell. The next structure is the mitochondria. The mitochondria has to do with energy and power. They call it the powerhouse of the cell. It's going to be where energy is produced for the cell. This is the structure of it. It has lots of folded membranes inside of it that helps it to function and increases its surface area. This is what it looks like. Some people say it kind of looks like a peanut, like with a shell on. And this is what the structure is. The counterpart of the mitochondria is the chloroplast, which again is found only in plant cells. The function of this is really photosynthesis. It takes the energy from the sunlight and it converts it into chemical energy in order for the plant to use it. So it really also has to do with energy, but we're talking about energy from the sun. Here's the structure of the chloroplast, what it looks like. It has many discs in here where there's lots of chemical reactions taking place. And this is part one of the cell. We will continue with part two.